Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is July 12th, 2025. July 12th, 2025. Today is day 645. 645 days since October 7th of 2023. This weekend is our weekend of impact. I think all of you, or many of you, or at least some of you, know that I'm training to compete in an Ironman on September 20th. That's 140.6 miles, 2.4 miles swimming, 112 miles biking, and then a marathon, which is 26.2 miles. And so our goal is to raise $1,000 for every mile. So to raise $140,600, we are at more than 10% of that goal. We have until September 20th. And this weekend's a weekend of impact. So if you give, your gift will be doubled. And so many of you have, and we're so, so grateful. But if you've not, would you consider supporting me personally? But the resources go towards our work at Churches for Middle East Peace. I'm happy to talk about that more if that's of interest. I wanted to move on to what's been happening in the last 24 hours. I'm in Gaza. The UN has said today, on Saturday, that the fuel shortage in Gaza has reached critical levels. They said that a lack of fuel meant, quote, lifelines will vanish for 2.1 million people. The UN said the majority of people in Gaza are teetering on the edge of starvation. The UN also said fuel supplies are needed to move essential goods across Gaza. One of the reasons that fuel is not allowed in is because Israel says that it would be supporting the efforts of Hamas. Fuel, there's not even fuel available for cars if there were roads that still exist for people to drive upon. It also inhibits a network of bakeries from being able to produce fresh bread for the affected population. Now, I want you to be clear, this message of fuel being at critical levels was made after the announcement that I read yesterday about COGAT, where COGAT, the coordination body for the Israeli military, said 150,000 liters of fuel were transferred into Gaza this past week. So what's that mean? It either means 150,000 liters of fuel is a drop in the bucket, or two, it means the fuel is not getting to the communities that need it, or three, somebody's just not telling the truth. The bottom line is people in Gaza desperately need fuel, and it's not getting to the places that need it most, which will cause even more death and suffering. Israeli airstrikes killed at least 28 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, including 4 children. That was reported today from the hospital reports. The 4 children and 2 women were among 13 people who were killed in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza after Israeli airstrikes pounded the area starting late on Friday. This was officials from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital reporting about that particular incident. The UN said yesterday nearly 800 people have been killed trying to access food in Gaza since late May, when Israel began easing a more than 2-month blockade on deliveries. The UN Human Rights Office spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani said most of the deaths occurred near the facilities of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by the United States and Israel. You'll recall that the US just passed giving tens of thousands of dollars to the GHF. When asked about UN figures, the Israeli military said it worked to minimize, quote, possible friction between aid seekers and soldiers, and it concluded, quote, thorough examinations of incidents, end quote, in which, quote, harms to civilian who arrived at the distribution facilities were reported. End quote. So the Israeli military has said they're working to minimize friction. They said they're investigating those incidents. GHF called the UN report false and misleading and said that most deadly attacks on aid sites could have been linked to UN convoys. Now, Al Jazeera has leaked and exposed a plan that Israel has, which was published. So this was leaked by Al Jazeera. They got their hands on it, and Al Jazeera published it. The plan is to annex 40% of the Gaza Strip, which would trap 700 Palestinians in Rafah, the remains of the city of Rafah. This map is called a repositioning map. It was presented by the Israeli delegation in negotiations. It keeps the entire city of Rafah under military occupation. Rafah would be turned into a concentration area for displaced Palestinians, which would pave the way for their forced transfer to Egypt or by sea. The map establishes a buffer zone reaching up to 3 kilometers deep inside of Gaza along the eastern border. The areas to be seized under this plan would include large parts of Beit Lahia, the entire village of al-Nasr, most of Beit Hanun, all of Kuzaa, and areas of al-Tufa, al-Shujaiya, and al-Qarara. The plan would cut off 40% of Gaza's territory. It would prevent 700,000 Palestinians from being able to return to their homes, and it would corral them into displacement centers in Rafah. I read an article in Israeli newspapers where a Jewish Israeli said this is nothing less than a concentration camp. This would not be a repositioning, it would be the codification, according to this report in Al Jazeera, of permanent ethnic cleansing under the guise of negotiations. CNN had a separate report that was out today. It was called Battered But Not Beaten, and it talks about how Hamas has embraced guerrilla tactics with deadly force. A recent attack against Israeli soldiers in Gaza highlighted a shift by Hamas to guerrilla-style tactics. Throughout the war, Israeli forces have had to return to parts of Gaza multiple times because they, at least according to their reports, rid the area of Hamas, and then Hamas re-emerges in areas that Israel had claimed it previously cleared. About an hour before the recording of this daily update, about 5 p.m. in the East Coast, there was an article by Reuters about the Gaza truce and how it has faltered over the withdrawal of the Israeli military. 17 people were reported killed in this article in Reuters reports in the latest shooting near aid. Those are the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid centers. That's a Reuters report. Progress is stalling as talks aimed at securing a ceasefire in Gaza have continued. They now been, my understanding is, I don't know that they're ongoing right now. With the sides divided over the extent of Israeli forces' withdrawal from the Palestinian enclave, Palestinian and Israeli sources similar with the negotiations in Doha said that today. The indirect talks over a proposal for a 60-day ceasefire have continued. So they did continue today. 7 days after the talks began, US President Trump said he hoped for a breakthrough on a new US-backed ceasefire proposal. It seems that the most unresolved issue that is significant is the withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza, where that would be and what those terms would look like. In other words, the ceasefire talks have stalled. In Lebanon, the health ministry today said an Israeli strike on South Lebanon killed one person, the latest attack despite the ceasefire between Israel and Iran's backed Hezbollah. In the statement, the ministry said the Israeli enemy's strike on a home in Wata al-Khaim killed one person. In Iran, the foreign minister Arachi warned today that a so-called snapback of UN sanctions could end Europe's role in the issue of Tehran's nuclear program. The comments came as the minister said the country's cooperation has ended with the International Atomic Energy Agency and that it will now take on a new form. A new law with the Iranian parliament stipulates that any future inspection of Iran's nuclear sites by the IAEA would have to have approval by the Supreme National Security Council, the top body within Iran. In the occupied West Bank, which was where I wanted to close, I wanted to give more of an update about the horrific killing by extremist settlers in the West Bank this past week. One of the victims was a joint US-Palestinian citizen. This is a snapshot from an article in the British news outlet, The Guardian. Israeli settlers have killed the American Palestinian who was visiting his relatives in the West Bank, the family said. Ambulances were reportedly stopped from reaching Safole Musalet after an attack on which the Palestinian man was shot dead. So this is the beginning of the article. A 20-year-old Palestinian American was killed by Israeli settlers while visiting relatives in the occupied West Bank. Saif Musalet was reportedly beaten by Israeli settlers while he was on his family's farm in an area near Ramallah. A group then prevented ambulances from reaching Musalet for 3 hours, according to the family, who said he died of his injuries before reaching the hospital. I was the first one to reach Saif, said Mohammed Nail Hijaz, a 22-year-old friend of Musalet. He was not moving when I got there and he could barely breathe. There was time to save him. I just want to be sure that you caught that. Another Palestinian man, a 23-year-old Razek Hussein al-Shalbi, was fatally shot during the attack. He was left to bleed to death, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. The funeral will be held on Sunday, tomorrow, where they can be buried together, according to a cousin. A 20-year-old so that was that news. I wanted to let you know the attack came amid a wave of increased Israeli settler violence. I just was speaking to Munter Itzhak this morning, the pastor of the Lutheran Church in Ramallah, and he said it's dangerous to just even leave Ramallah because the extremist settlers are so out of control. More than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, 9,000 injured since the attacks on October 7th, 2023. Now, the Israeli military claimed in the incident with the death of al-Shalbi and Musalat, they claimed stones were thrown at Israelis. There was a violent confrontation. They were aware of the reports concerning the Palestinian civilian. And a spokesperson for the US State Department said they were aware of reports that they have invited the family to consult consular services. They did not decline further out of respect for privacy of the family. In a statement, the family demanded an investigation by the US State Department into the killings, calling on it to hold the Israeli settlers who killed Saif accountable for their crimes. This is that Palestinian American citizen. In addition to that, 3 Palestinian American teenagers have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th, and no one has been punished or held accountable for their deaths. Churches for Middle East Peace will be putting out a statement about this incident in the coming week. I want you to know just a little bit about Musalet before I close. He was born and raised in Florida. He just opened an ice cream shop in Tampa with his father. He traveled to the West Bank to visit relatives at the beginning of June. Hijaz said he was a very sweet guy, full of hopes and dreams. In a statement, the family said Saif was a brother and son, just starting the prime of his life. He was kind, hardworking, deeply respected. Saif built a successful business in Tampa. He was known for his generosity, ambition, and connection to his Palestinian heritage. And finally, I want to close. Today, I had the privilege of spending several hours with members of the Arab Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. We gathered to honor the life and legacy of one of their members, a physician, the man who happened to be my childhood pediatrician. He actually held me before my mother held me after I was born, and he was the one who handed me to my mom on the very first few hours of my life. And when I think about the providence of God, this man, the very first pediatrician to ever come to the small county where I was born, he was a Palestinian Christian. This man has taught me about Jesus and the love of Christ. He's taught me about the cry of the Palestinian church. He's a mentor and a saint, and he's a part of the community of Christ. And I'm so grateful for his legacy and for his witness. God's hand is on my life, and God's hand is on your life. For me, this story is just a glimpse from the very first time I took breath. I was connected to the story of the Palestinian people. And what a gift and privilege it is. Might God bring peace for their sake and for ours. In the name of Christ, amen.